Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of educational psychology. This week we're going to be talking about cognitive development, which is the second chapter in your Slavin text. As a reminder, before we get started, make sure you watch all the way through because somewhere within this video will be your check for understanding activity. And as a recap, each week you will be required to submit a check for understanding activity that will be embedded somewhere within the recorded lecture that I provide for you guys. So I'll make it very clear when there's an area as a part of this particular lecture that is a part of your check for understanding activity for this week. All right, so today on the agenda is to discuss several major developmental theorists, their contribution to psychology and educational psychology, as well as chat about how their specific theories apply to the classroom. We're going to discuss how language and literacy develops through children's lifespans. And then we're going to wrap up by talking about the big 5 ideas in reading. So why should teachers learn about how children develop cognitively? This is the first part of your check for understanding activity. So pause the video after I'm done talking, pull up a Word document, and write out why you think that teachers need to learn about how children develop cognitively. All right, once you have written down your answer as to why you think teachers should learn about how children develop cognitively, you can minimize your Word document and listen to the lecture until I stop you again. So, psychology theorists have been proponents of teachers learning about children's cognitive development for a long time. So the next couple slides are just some quotes I've taken from famous psychologists. So William James, who's considered the father of psychology, way back in 1899, gave his support for teachers learning about children's cognitive development. He said that by learning about this, teachers can be saved from using ineffective teaching strategies. Wow, we knew that all the way back in 1899, and that still rings true today. So by learning about cognitive development of children, teachers can use more effective teaching strategies that match up to children's cognitive level. John Dewey, 1964, said that fostering mental growth requires teachers who can initiate, recognize, maintain, and assess children's inner engagement in subject matter. And he also said that teachers should be concerned with how the child's past and present experience may be related to the subject matter. So teachers should learn about cognitive development so that they can see where children are and shape where they're going to go in terms of learning. Then Vygotsky in the 70s, who we'll be talking about a little bit later as a major developmental theorist, said that when teachers understand children's cognitive development, they can recognize where a skill is beginning to blossom or emerge, and then the teacher themselves can take that emerging skill and guide the child or scaffold them from a beginning level of the skill to a more mature, more complex understanding of a skill. Piaget, who we're going to talk about next, said that when designing environments and interacting with children, teachers foster inventiveness, creativity, and critical thinking within children. Cami from 1973 said that the task of the teacher is to figure out what the learner already knows and how the learner reasons or thinks in order for the teacher to ask the right question at the right time so that the learner can build his own knowledge. Then last but not least, Bronfenbrenner, who we're also going to discuss, says that teachers who guide children's learning really foster that learning by understanding how knowledge, practices, and language patterns within the children's families and communities contribute to the children's ability to function in the classroom. So Bronfenbrenner is really big on how the environment impacts the children. So he states that by understanding children's cognitive development, you also have to understand how the environment, their families, and communities impact the child's development. So how do children develop cognitively? Now that we've discussed why it's important for teachers to learn about cognitive development, we're going to switch gears and look into how it actually occurs. Children go through astounding changes throughout the course of their first 18 years of life. Some changes are very obvious. Children grow and get bigger. They become smarter. They become more socially adept. But changes that are not so apparent are also occurring at the same time, and children may develop at different rates and in different ways. Development as a term is defined as how people grow, adapt, and change over the course of their lifetime. Development can be influenced by many factors such as biology, the culture in which a person is developing, parenting practices, education, as well as other things. And really, what the field of developmental psychology has told us is that children are not just miniature adults, but rather, upon birth, infants grow and build skills all the way until adulthood, and it doesn't all exist at once, but rather it's a skill that develops over time. So, by the nature of that, students will think and perceive the world differently than adults. So, when teaching, developmental level needs to be taken into consideration to best instruct the student. There are several issues of development that developmental psychologists have grappled with over the years, and we'll talk about both of them. So the first is the nature-nurture controversy, and the second are continuous versus discontinuous theories. All right, so here is the next step of your check for understanding activity for this week. So you'll pull back open your Word document, and right underneath where you wrote your first paragraph, you're going to answer the question of what is the nature versus nurture controversy. So based on what you have read in your textbook for this week, give me a brief paragraph on the nature versus nurture controversy and describe it. All right, now that you have written your paragraph on the nature versus nurture controversy, you can go ahead and minimize your Word document and continue watching the lecture. As a review, most developmental psychologists believe that nature and nurture combine together to influence cognitive development. So one side is not necessarily supported by research to be correct, but rather, together, both more completely answer the question of how development occurs. So the nature side of the nature versus nurture controversy states that biological factors and heredital factors are what influence development. So looking at children's temperament really shapes a child's experience as they grow up. Studies have shown that when children are shy, they receive different feedback from their environment and the people around them versus when a child is outgoing. So, by that very nature, that can shape a child's development. In addition, we know that learning disabilities can be largely hereditary. So, hereditary meaning that it runs in families, and just by having a relative who has that disability, a child becomes more predisposed towards developing it. On the other side of the argument, nurture says that it's the environmental factors that shape development. So, your home life, exposure to different events as a child, different life events, those really can shape how a child develops. So, for example, children who are read to from a very early age as compared to their peers who are not read to are more likely to experience academic success. Additionally, culture, socioeconomic status, access to early childhood education, and other resources can really impact how a child develops. So which side do you choose? Do you believe that nature is more responsible for shaping development, or do you think nurture is more responsible for shaping a child's development? Or do you believe that a combination of both of these things go into how a child develops cognitively? Here is the next question for you to write down for your check for understanding activity. So on your Word document, right underneath the other two paragraphs that you've previously written, answer the question, what are the differences between continuous and discontinuous theories? And from your reading, you should be able to answer this. All right, now that you have written down your paragraph describing the differences between continuous and discontinuous theories, you can go ahead and minimize your Word document and continue listening to the lecture. As a recap, continuous theories of development posit that development happens smoothly. So skills develop smoothly over time based on a child's experience and their environment. Whereas discontinuous theories posits that development occurs in stages. So rather than that smooth progression of skill development, discontinuous theories think that development happens via abrupt changes that are brought on by new stages of development. And most discontinuous say that environment has some influence, but it's really that nurture piece that drives children's sequential milestones. And they think that these milestones are met at fixed times, so fixed ages in a child's lifetime. The first developmental theorist that we're going to talk about is Jean Piaget. So Piaget thinks that cognitive development is discontinuous. So he's a discontinuous theorist or a stage theorist. He thinks that there are 4 stages of cognitive development through which people progress between birth and young adulthood. The sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages. So again, Piaget is a stage theorist, which means that he believes development occurs in distinct stages. So his sensory motor stage occurs between the ages of newborn to 2 years of age. And then, once a child moves all the way through the sensory motor stage, Piaget proposes that they move into the pre-operational stage, which is where they stay until they're 7. And after the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage lasts until about 11 years of age, after which children will pass through to the formal operational stage. And importantly, stages with Piaget's theory cannot be skipped, so they have to be fulfilled sequentially. So Piaget believed that all children are born with this innate ability to interact with and make sense of their environment. So from the very beginning, children develop schemas. And schemas, according to Piaget, are these mental guides for behavior. So children will develop these in order to be able to make sense and participate in the world. Each concept or object that a child interacts with or comes into contact with has their own schema, which are then created or developed further, made more complex as the child interacts with them in their environment. So a classic example of this is when a child develops a schema of a dog. So within this schema or mental guide of what a dog is, a child may learn that a dog has 4 legs, has fur, has a tail, makes a lot of noise. So therefore, when they come in contact with other dogs that also have fur, 4 legs, a tail, and make noise, they can mentally classify them as dogs. But then what happens when a child comes in contact with a cat for the first time? Well, a cat also has fur, has 4 legs, has a tail, makes noise. So within this stage, kids may incorrectly label this cat as a dog. So that's why, according to Piaget, children make this error. If you think of any young children that you may know personally, I bet that many of them have made this misclassification error where they call a cat a dog or vice versa, call a dog a cat. And it's not until they learn that a cat is actually its own classification that they're able to make their schema more complex to discern correctly between a cat and a dog. So within making schemas more complex, children engage in assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation is where that new object that a child experiences in the environment is incorporated into an existing schema. So in the previous example, seeing that new dog and then incorporating it into the schema to further solidify that, oh, this is a dog, and I'm classifying it as such in my mind. That is assimilation. The cat scenario is accommodation. So when a child experiences an object that does not fit within the current schema, they have to modify the existing schema to fit these new situations. And that modification is called accommodation. So understandably, finding out that a cat is in fact not a dog can be a little disorienting and lead to some imbalance because there's this discrepancy between what the child understands to be true via their schemas and this new information that doesn't fit in. So that imbalance, according to Piaget, is called disequilibrium. And the goal during cognitive development is for children to restore that balance or reach equilibration. So that balance between present understanding and the new experience that may challenge existing schemas. So here's another example of assimilation and accommodation. Children like to bang things, so give a baby a spoon and they will likely bang it off the table a couple times. And for them, they know within their mental representation or schema of that spoon that it is hard, they can grasp onto it, and they can bang it, and it'll make noise. So, when given a block, they are able to assimilate that block into their current schema because they're also able to bang it off the table, hold on to it, and make noise. So their schema is not really being challenged by introducing this block. Rather, the old schema is being reinforced that they can now incorporate this object and receive the same results. However, when handed an egg, all of a sudden, the infant bangs the egg against the table and it breaks, it shatters. And no longer can they hold on to it and continuously bang it. So that presents a problem, and that challenges the child's schema. So then the child then has to learn that, oh, there are certain things that I can bang off the table and I can keep banging and keep having fun with, and then there are other things that I need to be careful with, and if I bang them, they will break. So then the child goes through accommodation to fit this object into the scheme, so into the schema. All right, now we're going to look a little bit more in depth into the 4 stages proposed by Piaget. So again, the sensory motor stage is what a child is in from birth until they're roughly 2 years of age. So sensory motor, what occurs in this stage is really what that word represents. So sensory and motor. Children are exploring the world through the sensory information that they're receiving. So how things look, feel, sound, smell, and taste. And then they're also exploring the world through their motor movements or actions that they themselves can perform or that can be performed on the sensory information that they are receiving. So kiddos within this age range of birth to 2 years, they suck on things, they grab things, they hit things, and this is how they're exploring their world. Within each of the stages proposed by Piaget are some unique features. So a unique feature of the sensory motor stage is called object permanence. So at this stage of a child's cognitive development, most kiddos do not have object permanence, or the understanding that even though an object is out of sight, it still exists. So for young children, playing peekaboo is really puzzling to them because when an adult hides their face behind their hands to that child, the adult actually disappears because they don't understand that even though they can't see the adult still exists. So to them, that's a mental quandary. In addition, when a toy is taken away, they don't understand that the toy still exists. It's just gone. So when a child has developed object permanence, that is when that understanding of, oh, even though I can't see this, it still exists, kicks in. So an example of this is when a kiddo is playing with her dad's keys, and the dad takes the keys away and puts them up on a shelf because he thinks that maybe playing with the keys are unsanitary. The child still remembers where the keys are, maybe finds a way up to the shelf to find the keys and then resumes play. So a child that didn't have object permanence would forget that the keys were even in existence. So they would think they were just poof, were gone. Whereas this other kiddo with object permanence was able to understand that even though the keys were out of sight, they still existed, and was able to find them and continue playing with them. So after the sensory motor stage, children move into the preoperational stage, which is roughly from the ages of 2 to 7. So some key tasks and unique features of the preoperational stage are a lack of conservation and reversibility, as well as egocentrism. So conservation is the idea that properties stay the same regardless of changes in other properties. And included in this week's module is a series of videos that showcase kids actually going through different tasks that were noted by Piaget. So there is a video of the conservation task, and the little girl within that video watches when 2 identical cups filled with the same level of water are presented to her, and then one of the cups is poured into a skinnier glass, which makes it look like there's a higher amount of liquid. And for that little girl, even though she just saw that they were in the same identical glasses, she now thinks that there's more water in the skinny glass than in the original glass because it is higher, it is taller. So for her, she lacks that law of conservation, and she doesn't realize that water will mold to the shape of its container. And then reversibility is the ability to change direction in one's thinking to return to a starting point. So an example of reversibility may be when a young child with one sibling, when asked the simple question of, do you have a brother? They may have difficulty reversing the situation to put themselves in their sibling's position and may reply no, even though they know that this person exists in their life. And then also, children at this stage think that everyone in the world sees the world exactly as they, the child, do. So in the video of an egocentrism task, you see the little boy looking at a view of this diorama on a table, and he's able to describe exactly what he sees. But then when moved to the other side of the table with the adult facing what the child just described, he's no longer able to see what he had previously described to describe what the adult is seeing. And he thinks the adult sees exactly what he's seeing at that point on the diorama. The next stage that children move into is called the concrete operational stage, which occurs from the ages of 7 to 11 roughly. And so this is when children are beginning to develop logical reasoning, and they begin to understand the law of conservation, but only in familiar situations. So we're not yet to abstract reasoning, but more of that concrete logic. So now they're able to infer reality, and they're able to see things in the context of other meanings. So, for example, when you show a child within the concrete operational stage a picture of a red car and then cover it up with a black film, the child who has mastered inferred reality knows that the car is still red, whereas a child who has not mastered inferred reality would think that the car was black. 2 other unique tasks of the concrete operational phase that are mastered are seriation and transitivity. So seriation just refers to arranging things in a logical progression, like from smallest to largest. And this is a good example down here of what a seriation task would look like. And then also, transitivity is a task that children that have successfully moved into the concrete operational phase are usually able to complete. So this is where children begin to mentally manipulate things, so mentally arranging, mentally comparing things. And then this leads into the mental ability to do math in your head, so mental addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and other similar math tasks. So the final stage that occurs at 11 years and continues into adulthood is called the formal operational stage. And this is where abstract thinking really kicks in. So this is where children are now able to deal with hypothetical situations or situations that are not directly in the same context as the child, and they're able to begin problem solving. So the mastery of those previous tasks, reversibility, seriation, transitivity, and inferred reality, all allow kids to start using that higher level problem solving. Now it's time for our fourth check for understanding question. So pull up your Word document and in a brief paragraph, brainstorm the ways that Piaget's work is important for the classroom today. So based off what we just talked about and what you've read in the book, just give me a few reasons why Piaget is still relevant and how his work shows up in the classroom. All right, now that you have written out your brief paragraph regarding the ways in which Piaget's work is important for the classroom today, you can go ahead and minimize your Word document and continue listening to the lecture. So let's talk about a few. So a really important thing that came out of Piaget's principles is that development precedes learning and that developmental stages are largely fixed. So the idea of developmentally appropriate education is really important, which we will get into in the next slide. There are some criticisms of Piaget's theory. Because he relied exclusively on these broad, fixed sequential stages and said that all children progress through them, a lot of critics have said that he underestimates children's abilities. Some kids pass through stages more quickly than others. Tasks, research has found, can be taught earlier than what Piaget proposed. There are some exceptions to egocentrism. Kids can master object permanence before the age of 2. And also, experience plays a role in development that Piaget did not account for. So Piaget was largely nature-based rather than nurture. So going back to the idea of a developmentally appropriate education, Piaget's theory really drove home the idea that kids are able to do certain cognitive tasks at different ages or different stages of development. So, for an appropriate education, the child needs the environment, curriculum, materials, and instruction to be suitable for them in terms of their physical and cognitive needs, as well as their social and emotional needs. So, the main teaching implications that are drawn from Piaget's theory are that it's important to think about the process of children's thinking and their cognitions, not only what the product of it is. So how do children learn? What are they able to learn at a certain age or a certain stage? And then also, an important implication is that children's ability to self-initiate and be actively involved in learning activities is really crucial. And also, like I mentioned at the beginning, we learned that children are not miniature adults. So practices that aim towards making children adult-like in their thinking don't really work. And from Piaget, we discovered a greater understanding of that and appreciate that more. So we accept the individual differences of kiddos during their developmental progress and structure education to be more developmentally appropriate to meet them where they are and help them grow.